is a remarkable colleague, I can't overlook this occasion to thank her for the work that she's done for more than a decade now with the Alberto Institute. Um, and Let me say that there will be questions at the time for questions at the end. You can either send. The best way to do it would be to send me a written question via chat, or you could indicate there that by raising your hand that you'd like to ask a question. Okay. Um, Now it's a special honor and privilege to introduce Teo Barolini. I've admired her writing ever since I first read her as a graduate student at the University of California in Berkeley. She is one of the world's really, how to put it, most illustrious Dantists. They don't pull teeth, they interpret Dante. And she was a leader. This is particularly why I've been inspired by her for years in trying to find not just the theological reasons for Dante placing people in different circles and different places in hell, purgatory, and in heaven, but always attentive to the other reasons, poetic, political, and personal, that Dante had for not just his placements but also his treatments of the many people who populate his universe. An additional thing to note is that Teo Barolini belongs to a literary family. Her father, Antonio, was a distinguished poet and novelist, and her mother gave a Lamada lecture at Seton Hall among her many achievements. She's the author of what some consider to be the most important novel written by a woman, Italian-American novelist in the 20th century, Umbertina, which comes highly recommended. Dr. Barolini has been, was the 15th president of the Dante Society of America, and she's a member of the Accademia Nazionale dei Lincei and the Accademia Olimpica, where she'll be speaking soon via Zoom. Without further ado, and also a strong welcome to our students who are in attendance. I'll pass things to Dr. Barolini. If she could tell me when to put up the PowerPoints, that would be nice too.
Okay, well, I think we could put it up. I'm going to say a few introductory words. Well, to start with, I would like to thank my hosts, first Professor Connell, the holder of the La Motta Chair, which makes this possible, and Professor Romani, the director of the Alberto Institute, which I believe is also part of making this possible. And I would like to say that they are both friends and colleagues I so much admire, and also neighbors. It's true that it doesn't seem to matter because we can Zoom with anywhere, but it does matter to me. And Seton Hall is one of the places I would have accepted, even not in a pandemic, because I actually like to go to neighboring places and to see the colleagues who are really part of this community. So thank you so much, Bill and Gabriela, I really appreciate it. And thank you also, Bill, for the shout out to my mom, who is 95 and who will very much appreciate your kind words. So today I am going to take you on a gallop through a number of categories which I have put under the one rubric, Dante's Others, which I've used to broadly indicate all groups that Dante treats who are not like himself. By himself, let's say a man who is also a knight Dante had a horse that he took to the Battle of Campaldino, of a good family that was less good than it used to be, and of, unfortunately, limited means. Dante's thoughts about differences between Florentine men of his era, his ideas on wealth and social status, are for another time. Today, I will look at Dante's handling of categories of sexual, racial, and religious. Excuse me?
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Okay, I think it was the word sexual that did it. I'm going to be looking at categories of sexual, racial, and religious difference. And I am going to have to give a little trigger warning with respect to the sexual category. However, all the material I'm showing with you is from Italian art. So some other European art also. I'm going to use art to try to illuminate these categories for you, and Professor Connell is thankfully going to manage the PowerPoint. So just without further ado, then let's start by looking. The first category I'm going to look at is women, and then we're going to switch to the question of how Dante treats lust. Then we're going to switch to the question of how he treats homosexuality. Then we're going to switch to how he treats Jews, Muslims, and other non-Christians. Okay, so we'll start with some pictures of Beatrice, which you'll see here. And here, the point of this slide really is that I've given the last name that Boccaccio gives us. And the reason I'm giving you this last name is to point out what's truly important about what Dante is doing when he comes up with the idea of Beatrice as his Scala Dei, his staircase to the divine, his guide, which is that Beatrice is a person who lived historically, according to Boccaccio and according to other contemporary witnesses. So this is specifically not lady philosophy. He's doing something much more surprising, unexpected, not traditional, by having a young, beautiful woman whom he originally views as an object of desire. He wrote lyric love poems to Beatrice, and who becomes yet, takes on a role in the Commedia that is the role that traditionally was given to abstractions, female abstractions, but not to female actually existent people. This is an important point. So going on from here, I think the next is just a pretty picture. This is Dante Gabriele Rossetti's Beata Beatrix. And I use this for the title because maybe this gave me the idea for a phrase that I use, which I think is in the next slide. Yes, this is a phrase that I came up with a while ago. Beatrix loquax, Beatrice the speaker, loquacious Beatrice. And this is a way to consider what Dante is doing in the Commedia also, because in lyric poetry, and Dante started out as a lyric poet, the lady does not speak. The lady is desired. The point of view is that of the male lover, but the lady it never says anything. All of that is changed when Beatrice speaks to Virgilio in Inferno 2 and says, if you look at the third verse there, amor mi mosse che mi fa parlare. And all through the Paradiso, Beatrice speaks. She speaks as a philosopher, as a theologian. She speaks in a way that St. Paul had written was not appropriate. He says women should not be teachers. Women should not speak publicly. And so the next slide makes the point. This is Botticelli's image of Beatrice. You see her looming over Dante. She is the teacher. And This is one of his Paradiso images. And the verse that I've put here is from Paradiso 7, where Beatrice, about to give one of her speeches, says, secondo mio infallibile avviso. Now, the word infallibile, like the infallibility of the Pope, is used by Dante only twice in the Commedia, once for God's justice and here for Beatrice speaking. So it's really quite stunning, the role that he gives this historical female figure. Going on from here, now looking at just very briefly some of the other female figures in the Commedia, the point that really does come to one's mind is that Dante seems to be quite interested in the issue of domestic abuse and violence to women. This is Pia de Tolomei, of whom we know very, very little, but we do know, she says, in fact, that she was killed by her husband. And we also know the very famous case, which I think is on the next slide, or maybe the next slide is Picarda. Yeah, Picarda, Picarda Donati. Let's go to the picture which follows. Yes, here's Picarda being rapita, kidnapped from the cloister where she had gone voluntarily, kidnapped by the men of her brother Corso Donati because he wanted to marry her in a dynastic marriage that would be to his benefit as a politician. And this is how marriage worked in the upper class.
I forgot, Cass.
Eric, you need to, yeah, there you go. He's actually my student, so I know him. So here is Picarda being taken from the cloister. And again, an example of violence toward women. And the next example is the most famous of all, Francesca in Inferno 5. Here I've given, the reason I've spelled out that whole long name is to make the point of how her marriage was a dynastic marriage engineered by the Polenta family of Ravenna, into which she was born, with the Malatesta family of Rimini, into which she was married. So the real historical Francesca has absolutely no place in history. There is not one document that has her in it except for the will of her father-in-law, Malatesta da Verrucchio, who refers to her dowry, to the dowry of the late Lady Francesca and where it should go, because by now she was already dead. And I say this to say that when we think of Francesca, whom Dante puts in the circle of lust in Inferno 5, we think about the fact that Dante damns her. It's actually, to me, much less interesting that he damns her in his fiction than that he saves her to history. We know that she existed because Dante Alighieri wrote Inferno 5 and made her the protagonist. If you reread that canto, you will remember that the protagonist, the one who speaks all the way through it, coming back to the issue of female speech, is Francesca. Paolo never says a word. Now, the story that she tells is a story of how she fell in love with her brother-in-law, Paolo, and how her husband, Gianciotto Malatesta, then kills them both. And if we go on, I think I have some more pictures just to also give you some nice pictures. This is Flaxman's rendition of the same scene. Paolo and Francesca are reading from the romance of Lancelot. And as they're reading of how Lancelot kissed Guinevere, they kiss each other, and there is Gianciotto from behind the door peering at them and about to kill them both. And then next, I think we're about to have a big switch, but not so big, because Francesca, after all, is in the circle of lust, which is Canto 5 of the Inferno. Now, I'm sure that some of you have read Canto 5 of the Inferno. And if you have, I'm going to show you some pictures of it, but I'd like you to try to remember before I show you pictures, what is the punishment, the contrapasso that we find in Inferno 5? It is an infernal windstorm, bufera infernal. What Dante is dramatizing in Inferno 5 is that their passions moved them and dominated them, rather than they dominating their passions. And in fact, he defines lust as the situation that occurs cuando la ragion sommettono al talento, when they put reason under desire. Talento is an old word for desire. Rather, desire should always be subordinate to reason, not reason subordinate to desire. So Dante, in other words, is interested in the psychology of desire. He's not the least bit interested in what the preachers of the time referred to obsessively as fornication. Now, this is an image of Giotto. Giotto is an exact contemporary of Dante, and this is an image that I'm sure some of you have seen. It is from the Scrovegni Chapel in Padova, Giotto's Last Judgment. And I'm going to find here some art historians.
Yeah, it came back.
I'm going to find some art historians who can, so you won't blame me. I'm now quoting art historians, those of you who are going to be a little put off by the language. I'm quoting from two art historians who describe this detail which is the detail in which Giotto, in his treatment of hell in the Last Judgment, these are the lussuriosi, the sinners of lust. And they write that here we see near Satan's left hip, a scaly green monster. Do you see that scaly green monster? Gnaws on a man's penis. Above them, a black demon grabs another man's genitals, and so forth and so on. Okay, why? Because in the entire 1,000-year tradition of vision literature, going back to the apocalypses of St. Peter and St. Paul from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and continuing on to Dante's time, and in the pictorial tradition that went along with vision literature, punishment for sin in hell was done by being directed at the part of the body that does the sinning. So if you're a liar, it's going to be directed at your tongue. These are the lustful, so the punishment is sexualized. It is directed at the part of the body that sins. One of the things that got me started in this is that these same art historians that I was just quoting from actually say in that art bulletin essay that these punishments are surely borrowed from Dantean contrapassi. There are no sexualized torments in the Divine Comedy at all. Dante is simply not interested in it. That's why I started out by saying to you, he focuses on what interests him. What interests him is the negotiation of the soul of all of us between reason and desire. Our desires pull us one way. Our desires are important. It's not that Dante says to get rid of them. After all, he says desire is spiritual motion. Desio è moto spirituale. It's what ultimately leads you to God. But you have to control your desire with reason. So if we look at the next one, I think we will see a little more Giotto there. There you have the sexualized hair of those women who are hanging there, also lustful, hanging there from their hair. And now we will come to Dante's treatment of lust. And you will see that it is very, very, no, we're going to, before we get to Dante, I'm going to give you an even worse example of the typical approach to lust. This is Taddeo di Bartolo from the Collegiata di San Gimignano. This is 1396. This is later than Dante. Dante died, as you know, in 1321. And this is Lusuria as he treats it in his depiction of hell in San Gimignano. And as you can see, it is an entirely, the torment that is imagined is completely sexual. In comparison to what we see now in Inferno 5, where there we go. Here we have some manuscripts. You can't see so well in the manuscripts because they're little, but you can see that the souls are being blown about by an infernal windstorm. Maybe Professor Romani can remind me the name of Lina Wertmüller's film, Travolti, because it is exactly the same metaphor that Dante is using here, where you are flung about by your passion. So we'll see a few more images of Inferno 5. Again, manuscripts, maybe we'll come to something a little more fun like Blake or Doré. Yes, here we have Blake. This is Blake's rendition of the Bufera Infernal that tosses the lustful souls about, as in life, they allowed themselves to be tossed about by their passion. That's Dante's point. He's not the least bit interested in talking about the sexual act. The only sexual act he mentions in Inferno 5 is that moment when they kiss. And frankly, he seems more interested in the fact that they were reading a book and that the book led them to kiss. So Professor Connell, if we could see what we have next. This is Doré, same thing, Inferno 5. And now I think we're going to go to homosexuality. Yes, so this is Taddeo di Bartolo again, and this is a very gruesome image. I apologize, but there it is in San Gimignano. And you can see on the hat of the sinner who is lying prone, you can see maybe that the words, sodomito are written there, the word. And he is skewered like, well, I won't continue. This is the treatment of homosexuality, sodomy in Taddeo di Bartolo. Now let's see what Dante does with sodomy. This is Inferno 15, Brunetto Latini. He is being, like all the others, pelted with rain of fire, flakes of fire that are falling down on this desert. Now, I really don't want to get into what punishment is worse in making a gradatio of punishments. My point is really, though I think few things could be more gruesome than the slide we just saw of Taddeo di Bartolo's Sodomito. But the point that I'm making is Dante's imagination, which I have called a non-stereotyping imagination, simply does not go toward sexual torment. And it doesn't with heterosexual lust, and it doesn't here with homosexual lust. Continuing, I think we have some more images of, so after Brunetto Latini in Inferno 15, in Inferno 16, Dante and Virgilio encounter 3 noble Florentine sodomites. That's how the commentary tradition refers to them. And the poet describes them as like 3 wrestlers in a circle. And so you'll see that image is there. And let's see if we have another one. This is Blake, the 3 wrestlers of the circle of sodomy in Inferno 16. And now maybe we also have Flaxman. And there's Flaxman, same 3 Florentine sodomites. However, I think possibly most people, well, for sure, most people, most even well-read people, don't realize that Dante doesn't limit his treatment of homosexuality to Inferno. He also puts homosexuals in purgatory. Now, in Inferno, he doesn't actually put homosexuals in the circle of lust. I mean, there may be some, he doesn't show us any. He puts sodomy as a form of violence against nature. And I'm bringing, so it's in the circle of violence, not in the circle of lust at all. And I'm bringing this up because that makes it all the more easy for Dante to simply have never, ever referred to sodomy again. It's not even part of the taxonomy of purgatory, because purgatory is structured according to the 7 deadly vices, so that you never have a category like violence or like fraud as you have in hell. Instead, you simply have the terraces of pride, envy, anger, sloth, avarice, gluttony, and at the top, the least sinful, lust. So if you're going to put homosexuals in purgatory, you have to flip the conceptual model that you had in hell, where you have considered them violent against nature, and you have to consider them lustful. Now, the lustful who are in purgatory are people who are saved. Important to understand, every soul you encounter in purgatory is saved. And the souls on the terrace of lust are purging their excessive lust. And Dante puts on the terrace of lust in Purgatorio 26, and I think this will be the next slide. He puts two circles. One is a group that are heterosexual lovers, and the other, going counterclockwise to the first group, is a group of homosexual lovers. And they meet and they exchange chaste kisses. You can see 2 members, one from one group, one from the other, in the middle of that top image, exchanging a chaste kiss. So let's see some more of Purgatory's Terrace of Lust. Yes, maybe we have one non-manuscript, which is a little bit bigger and where you can see a little bit better. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, so there's Flaxman. You can't see the 2 circles anymore, but what he's showing is a member from each of the circles engaging in the chaste kiss when they meet. But the important point that I want to make here is nobody would have criticized Dante if he had never mentioned homosexuality again. Nobody would have said, why are there no saved homosexuals in your purgatory? Why? Instead, Dante really quite emphatically breaks with convention by imagining that in the same way that people who are too lustful as heterosexuals can yet repent and then purge their excessive lustful feelings in purgatory, the same thing can be done by homosexuals. That's really quite a leap on the part of somebody in 1300. Okay, which is not to say that people in their individual lives might not have countenanced many behaviors. It's to think about it taxonomically and be able to say, actually, I'm going to reclassify homosexuality as something that can be purged like anything else. Because the whole basis of purgatory is that there are vices in us that we can purge, whereas the basis of hell is not inclinations, not vices, but actions that we have already accomplished. In purgatory, if you're in purgatory, you have repented of your bad actions, and now you're working on a kind of medieval therapy in which you are purging yourself of those inclinations that led you to do the bad actions that you have now repented of. Okay, so moving on. Okay, we're now switching to religious and racial others. And I put here the cover of this book, Saracens, Demons, and Jews, Making Monsters in Medieval Art, because it is really the book that I have used for the iconography that I will show you in this section of my presentation. Giotto, Taddeo di Bartolo, manuscripts of the Divine Comedy, illustrations of the Divine Comedy. What I have been showing you, I can find by myself, but really this is a very specialized field. And this book was extremely useful to me. So I want to give full credit to it. So the first category that we're going to talk about here is Dante's handling of Jews. And again, I'm going to do the same thing, same practice. I'm going to show you the context, because really what I've been doing as a methodology is I've been using art to sensitize you to what would be, shall we say, a more typical way of considering lust or considering homosexuality. And then I'm showing you what Dante does not do, okay? So the reason I came up with this idea of using art is because otherwise it's difficult to get people to think about what someone is not doing, right? But yet that really is my point. My point is that there are many things Dante does not do that I think, in fact, people think he does do, like those two art historians who wrote in their essay on Giotto, surely these torments, these sexualized torments, are Dantean contrapassi. So I'm basically, in other words, not a full historian the way Professor Connell is, but I am trying to bring a greater historical accuracy to our reading of Dante Alighieri. So this is Deborah Strickland's book. This is imagery of typical stereotypes used in medieval art to depict Jews. And in this particular illustration image, you can see examples of the use of the nose and of what is called the Phrygian cap. The central figure there with a small nose and no cap is Christ. Around that central figure, you can see Caiaphas and other Jews. And now another image. Here, the one that I would like you to focus on is the bottom one. Maybe you can see there that there's an eye. That eye is one side of a hell mouth. Hell mouth was an iconography for hell as a mouth that was devouring the sinners. And you can see that going into hell mouth are Jews. And you can see that because they have on their Phrygian caps and other markers, according to contemporary iconography, that marks them as Jews. This brings to mind, for a Dante scholar, that there are no contemporary Jews in Dante's hell. He does put the Pharisees, Caiaphas and Annas, among the hypocrites in Inferno 23, but there are no contemporary Jews. And in some ways, my meditation on this topic started years ago when I read an essay about essentially holding Dante to task for not including contemporary Jews in the Commedia. And as I studied this issue, I began to think that that was maybe not such a bad thing, because the inclusion would perhaps have brought one to a scene like this. And then the next image, this is just this is not related to Dante, it's just one of the images in the book in which you see a Jew's head put on the body of a monster. So conflating these others, Jews, with monsters. And excuse me, there you can see a full hell mouth that you only saw one half. This is the bottom image. You see the hell mouth, the two eyes and the mouth of hell. And then in the mouth of hell is a cauldron. And in the cauldron are sinners. The sinners at the very front, and the face is abraded, but you can see around the neck a money bag. This was another absolutely stereotypical component of the iconography for Jews in medieval art, the wearing of the money bag. So this got me thinking, because Dante does have money bags in his hell, and he has money bags around the necks of the three usurers whom we find in Inferno 17. And usury was the absolutely quintessential Jewish sin. The charging of excess money in loans. But what does Dante do? He gives us usury. He uses money bags. The only place in the Divine Comedy where he has this concept of money bags, and he makes a big fuss about the money bags. If we go to the next image, maybe we'll see some of it. Oh no, this is a shout out to my digital commentary of the Divine Comedy that you can find on Digital Dante at columbia.edu. And I have I have a commentary on every canto in the Commedia. And this is, I gave you this one because you can see that my title for Inferno 17 is Usury and the Absence of Jews. And that really is the takeaway point that I'm making, which is just where you would most expect if you were going to have contemporary Jews in the Commedia to find them, which is in the treatment of usury. Dante, again, does not do what expectation would have led us to think he would do. He simply doesn't go in that direction, just as he did not in the treatment of Francesca in the Circle of Lust, just as he did not in the treatment of Brunetto Latini among the homosexuals. But he does remind us of what the stereotype is, because he uses the money bags. And here, the next image should show us some. So these are manuscripts, so they're little, but if you look at the middle panel, you will see that the three figures who are crouching, who are smaller, you can see that they have pictures on them. Those pictures are the heraldic crests of their families. Dante describes each heraldic crest, which is painted on the money bag that the usurer wears around his neck. And in this way, even if he didn't give us the names, he absolutely identifies the three Christians, 2 Florentines and 1 Padovano, all from great families. The Padovano is actually a Scrovegni, the same family that would give the money for the Scrovegni chapel. And so my point is very simple again. It's simply that Dante uses the iconography typical of Jews, but he follows his own inclinations. His own inclinations are to lambaste Florentine and Italian usurers, bankers. He thought the Italian, Italy is the home of banking, and in Florence in Dante's time. And by the way, Dante's father was a moneylender. So Dante was quite familiar with this particular profession. Now, his father was mediocre, just middle level, nobody great. But the families that he gives here are all great families. Okay, I think we have a few more images of Inferno 17. Yeah, but we can barely see a thing, but you can see up in the top slide that they have the crests. If you go to Inferno 17 and if you read, you will see how precise Dante is. It's almost as though he's giving directions to illustrator. He says the animal that's on the crest, he says the color that the animal should be in. It's really, he's very insistent about that. And then the next one, and there's Blake. And there you can actually see the oca, the duck, that is the white duck that is on one of the family crests. Now, we're changing topics again now. And we are going to just go more broadly to the idea of non-Christians. And here I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Dante's Limbo, which is really a topic that particularly interests me. To do this, I have to backtrack a little. I have to give you a little context. Limbo is an ancient idea. It is an ancient part of Catholic theology. It also has a very recent history. In 2007, an international committee commissioned by the Pope published a document on the question of whether infants can be saved without baptism, which has a very meaningful effect on the status of limbo. Why? Because limbo is a place that was imagined to contain two groups: Hebrew matriarchs and patriarchs from the Bible. Those were the only adults imagined to be in limbo, in a proper Orthodox theological understanding of limbo. Those biblical worthies, adults, were taken from limbo by Christ at what's called the harrowing of hell, discesa agli inferi. And this event that occurs right after the crucifixion and the resurrection, and Christ on his way to heaven takes the biblical worthies with him. And after he does that, only children are left in limbo. Only children and babies who died before they received the sacrament of baptism, and therefore without the benefit of being cleansed of original sin. That is an Orthodox limbo. So when Dante took his journey in 1300, so when Dante took his journey in 1300, if I were teaching, I would ask you a question. Would there have been any adults? And the answer is absolutely not. No adults. They all left with Christ after the crucifixion. So let's say about 34 AD. In 1300 AD, there can be no adults. And so Dante is unique in the entire history of this theological concept when he posits that in limbo, there are adult pagans, non-Christians, and he takes a space that was imagined as a better than most of hell space, because it was the place where people who would eventually go to paradise, in the case of the biblical worthies, stayed until Christ could liberate them. And then it was the place for children and babies whom the laity really did not want to think of being tormented physically. And as Dante says, limbo, he understands the theology. He says that this is a place di duol senza martiri, suffering with sorrow without physical suffering. There is no actual physical torment in limbo. So you can see that this manuscript, on the top left, we see some souls in limbo who are philosophers of antiquity and poets of antiquity, Homer, Ovid. These are the people whom Dante puts here, most famously perhaps Aristotle, whom he calls il maestro di color che sanno, the master of those who know. This is really the place where Dante shows, and here, I don't know if Professor Cano will agree with me, but I think of Dante as truly a pre-humanist, and that his thank you, his adoration of these classical figures has to be taken very, very, very seriously. And I get very tired of the historiographical categories we were born into the profession with, but which I hope we have somewhat changed, whereby Dante is the Summa of the Middle Ages and Petrarch is the father of the Renaissance. Well, for goodness sakes, Petrarch was born in 1304, Dante was still alive. And the fact is that in this period in Italy, things are moving very, very fast. And I think we can really see Dante's prehumanism in the adoration he shows to the classical non-Christians whom he puts in limbo against all theological precedent. Absolutely no precedent for this. Now, this illustrator dresses the souls in limbo, whereas on the bottom right, you can see Paolo and Francesca undressed. And it's a way that the illustrator, who is a rather crude illustrator, has of showing the greater respect for the souls in limbo. Because in fact, the word that Dante repeats all the way through Inferno 4 is honor. Onorate l'altissimo poeta. These are people of great honor. Okay, so let's see what is next in store. This is same thing. This is from Inferno 4. I just saw a chat that says, wasn't limbo eliminated in 2007? Well, to be totally fair, we'd have to say it was reformed. But frankly, I can't see that it has much to do once you allow the idea that a child could possibly, but that's a different talk and I shouldn't go. But in that Vatican document, they do say that it is possible to imagine salvation without baptism. And once you make that concession, the person in the chat was right. There really is no purpose for limbo, because look what Dante says here. What is the reason that souls would be in limbo? He says, they did not sin, and yet though they have merits, that's not enough, perché non ebber battesimo, because they did not have baptism. So not having baptism was considered for most of Christian history to be an absolute game changer. No way without baptism. And yet in 2007, that was no longer allowed to be the case. So here we are, Dante putting adult non-Christians in limbo. Let's see what comes next. This is Doré. Again, these are the poets and the philosophers. This is like Dante imagines that they talk all the time, that they talk about philosophy, they talk about poetry. He joins a group of fellow poets and says, very teasingly to us, his readers, he says, we talked of things that that it's beautiful not to share, not to tell you. And probably, who knows, maybe they were talking about the invention of terza rima. Maybe Ovid said to Dante, gosh, you invented terza rima when you wrote this poem. Who knows? Next slide. So this is a manuscript again, and we can go on. This is still limbo. Here is a timeline. Now, this timeline is to try to make a point about how radical Dante's thinking is in his limbo. And here I again am going to have to open a bit of a parenthesis to create some context. The person I'm going to use to create the context is Boccaccio, who was trained as a canon lawyer. Boccaccio's father wanted him to be a lawyer, so did Petrarch's father want him to be a lawyer. They were both trained in the law. Both became great writers, as you know, and they are with Dante part of the Tre Corone of Italian literature. But so Boccaccio was trained as a lawyer, and Inferno 4 worries him. He is worried by all these adult non-Christians, but what he does is he focuses his worry on those who live after Christ. And he argues that whereas you could make the case that those who live before Christ, let's take Aristotle, for example, truly don't know of Christ, so that they could be held in some way harmless, that those who lived after Christ, it's impossible to make that argument. And Boccaccio goes so far as to say that the ones who live after Christ, and he lists them, and these are the ones on the timeline: Ovid, Lucan, Galen, Seneca, Ptolemy, and the reason I made the timeline is you can see how remarkable what Dante is, how remarkable it is what Dante does when he puts 3 virtuous Muslims in his limbo. These are people who lived centuries after Christ. And, Christ is a holy prophet for Islam. So it's not like there is no knowledge of Christ. So Dante here again, and he had himself, I showed you the previous slide where he says that these people lived before Christianity, that they did not sin. Dinanzi al Cristianesimo, and Cristianesimo rhymes with battesimo. They lived before Christianity, they did not sin, their only fault is not having been baptized. So how he changes his own rules in order to bring in 3 virtuous Muslims. And the one of these that I think is particularly interesting to those of us who study intellectual history is Averroes. Because Averroes, as Dante describes, he says, Averroes che il gran commento feo, the one who wrote the great commentary. And the commentary is the commentary of Aristotle, that they would not have known Aristotle in the Latin West without the transmission from Arabic to Latin and from Latin with the commentary. So Averroes translated from the Arabic into Latin, and he wrote the commentary that was used by all the scholastics in Paris. And when Dante says who made the great commentary, he's saying, how could I have known about Aristotle if I hadn't had Averroes? And I think truly there is the basis of why you find Averroes in limbo, despite the very logic of limbo, which is that they should be born before Christianity. Okay, going on. Now we come to a further elaboration of the idea of limbo. Limbo itself is already more than radical. It's really quite at the edge. As I said, literally nobody else ever imagined, either before Dante or after Dante, that limbo could house adults of different faiths who were so worthy in their, remember that Dante is not Protestant. Therefore, how does one achieve salvation? By works and by faith, not by faith alone, by works and by faith. He believes in meritorious action. And he gets kind of obsessed with how meritorious some non-Christians are. And that's really what I'm communicating here. Now, he also, the same way he puts homosexuals in purgatory when there would have been no clamor that he do so, there also would have been no clamor had he not saved any pagans. And yet Dante also saves some pagans. He has his own very peculiar little roster of saved pagans whom he imagines. And the only one of the saved pagans in the Divine Comedy who would have been, shall we say, conventionally accepted was the Emperor Trajan, because there was a long-standing legend that Pope Gregory the Great prayed for the Emperor Trajan, considered him so just and so good, and prayed for him with such fervor that the Emperor Trajan was brought back to life, converted to Christianity, and died again a Christian and went to paradise. So Dante, in accepting the salvation of Trajan, is following a legend, but he goes in a direction that is again idiosyncratic and unique to him in saving 3 other pagans: Cato of Utica, Statius, an epic poet who followed the Aeneid, followed Virgil, and of all things, Ripheus the Trojan. Ripheus the Trojan is a character in the Aeneid. You will remember, if you've read the Aeneid, that book 2 tells the story of the fall of Troy. And in telling that story, Virgil writes that there was a Trojan, Ripheus, who was justissimus, the most just. And when we get to the heaven of justice, lo and behold, we learn that Ripheus the Trojan was saved because he intuited, he had what is called fides implicita. Theologians absolutely had the idea of fides implicita, but they never bothered stipulating that anybody actually used it to get saved. Dante runs away with the concept and actually puts names on saved pagans. And this is, to me, the most glorious example. He actually says of Ripheus that he was baptized, as he puts it, more than 1,000 years before baptism exists. Okay, and he has no idea when Troy was, and he just says more than 1,000 years. And so going on from here, this is another image I love this image. This is from Giovanni di Paolo, 400 illustrations. This is the heaven of justice, where Dante imagines that that the souls take the shape of an eagle. And then the 5 souls that they talk about the most are the ones that form the eagle's eyebrow. And what the illustrator did is show those 5 souls no longer as really the eagle's eyebrow. And there we have, among them are Trajan, and then on the far right is Ripheus. So these souls are mostly not pagan. In the center is David holding his lyre, because this is the heaven of justice. But among these souls in the heaven of justice, Dante puts 2 saved pagans, one the Emperor Trajan, who I told you Gregory the Great prayed for, not such a surprise, and then a huge surprise, Ripheus the Trojan. And we could go on from there. That's a beautiful blue, isn't it? And here is another timeline that I made of the saved pagans. This really kind of just for fun, it just sort of amused me that with respect to the souls in limbo who live after the birth of Christ, the timeline works exactly the opposite. They're clustered around the birth of Christ just a little after it. And then you have that huge extent to get to the 3 Muslims. And then with the saved pagans, you have the opposite. They're clustered around the birth of Christ. And then you have to go way, way back into prehistory to get to Ripheus. Okay. What do we have next? We have the man born on the banks of the Indus. So this is from Paradiso 19, the same heaven of justice where we meet Trajan and Ripheus, the last 2 revealed saved pagans of the Divine Comedy. I'm just going to have a sip before I read this to you. This I will read in Italian because I love it. And also because I think it's very fascinating how Dante uses language that is syntactically so straightforward. He can write very convolutedly when he wants to. These words, this passage in which he describes a man who is born on the banks of the Indus River, who is completely virtuous in all of his actions. This is the premise. What does Dante have to say about it? 2 remarkable rhetorical questions at the end of this passage, which I will now read. Un uomo nasce alla riva dell'Indo e quivi non è chi ragioni di Cristo, né chi legga, né chi scriva. Note, lack of transmission of knowledge. How can it be his fault? There's no one here who speaks of Christ, nor who reads of Christ, nor who writes of Christ. Every possible modality of communication, oral and written. E tutti I suoi voleri e atti buoni sono quanto ragione umana vede, senza peccato, in vita o in sermoni. Muore non battezzato e senza fede. ove questa giustizia che lo condanna. This is the heaven of justice. Dante is speaking to the ego of justice, and he posits this case, a person born on the banks of the Indus, perfectly good in all of his actions. No one ever told him about Christ. Where is this justice that condemns him? Ove la colpa sua, se e non crede. Where is his fault if he does not believe? Look, the ego of justice is going to come down on Dante and say, oh, you human, you don't know anything. You can't see in the abyss of the divine mind. But the point really is the question. The point really is the question, because what Dante does here is he fashions a category. Look, limbo is in Inferno 4. It's somewhat analogous to what I was saying about the homosexuals. They are in Inferno 15 and 16. Many people don't realize that they appear again in Purgatorio 26, saved. The fact that they do means that for Dante, it is a category, not just a one-off. He's thinking about it. Same thing with this. Limbo, Inferno 4, very radical, but he might never have brought it up again, but he does bring it up again. He brings it up in the heaven of justice in order to say this problem is not just temporal. It's not just a problem for those worthy souls who lived before Christ. It is also a problem for contemporaries of mine who live in places like the banks of the Indus River, where there is no one to speak of Christ, read of Christ, or write of Christ. Okay, and we are coming to the end of this. In the same canto, he makes another remark, just again, Indus, people in the East. Now, then he also makes a remark about Ethiopians, which was a generic word for Africans. And he says, there will be many who cry, Christ, Christ. In other words, many who vaunt their Christianity, who at the final judgment shall be far less close to him than one who knows not Christ, like the Ethiopian. So another, coming back to this same idea of geographical disadvantage, but how somehow a person, even without the geographical ability to know of Christ, can actually in some way know Christ better. And then I think the next is going to be a picture. Yeah, this is from that same book, Saracens, Demons, and Jews, Making Monsters in Medieval Art. She doesn't have many images of Ethiopians. I think they were hard to find, but these are the ones that there are. And the point here is that Dante's reference to the Ethiopian that I just gave you from Paradiso 19 is entirely positive. In fact, suggesting that the Ethiopian may know Christ better than many Christians, whereas typically in the typical contemporary iconography, the Ethiopian would be aligned with monsters in the top image or with Antichrist in the bottom image, going to worship Antichrist. And I think that's going to bring me very close to the end. I think I have, yes. So this is the same Giovanni di Paolo who gave us that eagle. Look at that extraordinary blue background he uses. I just love it. And this is kind of my concluding remark, which is, this is an illustration of Paradiso 33. Paradiso 33 begins with 45 verses that are a prayer to the Virgin Mary. You can see the Virgin Mary there. Later in the canto, the pilgrim receives, is granted by grace, an image of all the universe as one volume. He sees all the accidents and contingencies of life made ordered, made clear, made comprehensible in one volume, un volume, that he can read, he can understand, he can see. He then says, after having that experience, that his stupore and his oblio, his inability to hold on to the extraordinary vision he had been granted is as great as the stupore, the amazement of Neptune, when Neptune looked up from the bottom of the sea and saw overhead the shadow of the first ship. The first ship was the Argo, sailed by Jason and the Argonauts. Now, what Giovanni di Paolo, this extraordinary illustrator, does here is he unpacked that analogy where Dante compares his own stupore at seeing the universe pulled together as one volume to that of Neptune when Neptune sees the first ship. Now, Dante's analogy is azzardato, as they say in Italian, because what does Neptune and classical antiquity have to do with this moment of a supreme Christian vision? And yet that's how Dante's mind works. It is supremely syncretic, supremely bringing in of all the cultures that he holds dear. And this is what Giovanni di Paolo captured here so beautifully, because he unpacked the analogy to Neptune and he makes this image where you have this ancient green sea, really redolent of classical antiquity, and Neptune and the Virgin Mary, and over on the side, Beatrice and Dante, all on the same visual plane. And I think in this image, for me, is beautifully captured the way Christianity and humanism live together in the Italian cultural imaginary. To me, really one of the signatures of the Italian cultural imaginary, which is why I use this image on the cover of a book, which is the next and last slide. My book, Dante and the Origins of Italian Literary Culture. And the reason I put that image is because I really do see that as profoundly originating of Italian literary culture, that bringing together of the humanistic secular with the transcendent religious Christian. And that is my presentation.
Thank you, Teo Barolini. If one can clap for all, that's what I was trying to do. It was a splendid talk. It prompted many thoughts on my part, and in particular, your use of the word humanism seems to me appropriate, especially if you think of the way Dante is almost clearing the path, making possible the questions and approaches, often less radical, of the humanists who follow in Italian literature.
Well, that was a beautiful synthesis. I would like to write down what you just said.
I had that he has asked moral questions about justice and lust, among other things, that are raised by writers later, and they wrote in more elegant Latin. But I thought that was fabulous. I had one question about the, if I can ask a first question, and then if anyone would like to ask questions in the chat, that would be terrific. But the question regarded limbo. And so there are these righteous pagans in limbo, together with the unbaptized children. And is there a hint anywhere that there may be a second harrowing of hell, perhaps at the last judgment, that would bring those people up out of limbo, just as the Hebrew patriarchs and matriarchs have been brought up?
No, there is not. And I'm very fascinated by that idea. Is there, in the later times that you know so well, is there ever a hint of a second harrowing of hell?
I don't know, but I think it would be, it's an interesting question. I don't know Joachim of Fiore as well as
I have never heard of that idea, but anything is possible. It's not in the Divine Comedy.
But it's not there. No.
No, in fact, in fact, it's not there as a matter of fact. You could not find it. It's not there. But it's also not there, if you permit me, as a matter of narratological exigency.
Okay.
Dante structures the entire poem around the character in many ways, the love that grows for two cantiche, all of Inferno and all of Purgatorio, between Dante and Virgilio. And Virgilio is going to go back to limbo. And the desire to not have Virgilio go back to limbo has prompted an actual historiographically documented little group of writings about, isn't it possible that Virgilio is going to be saved? But well, one is, I mean, whatever is possible is what Dante says is possible. It's his invention. It's his possible world. He never indicates anything like that. But the thing is, he would be much more interested in saving Virgilio than he would in saving the children, simply because he pays no attention to them. I just mean narratologically, the word infanti appears one time in Inferno 4. He's just not interested.
Right. So if a second harrowing of hell was
it would be for Aristotle.
Somewhere he would have thought it would have been raised with respect to Virgil first.
So if there were going to be such a thing, it would be for Aristotle, yes, and Virgil.
Oh, for Aristotle.
I mean, these are the people who captured his imagination. That's all. That's what I mean.
Okay, so
yeah, I mean,
are there other questions? Anyone have thoughts or?
But you could, if I could just answer that a little further. The young man who wrote in the chat wasn't limbo eliminated in 2007. Let's call that the second harrowing of hell. Because that Vatican document that says that after all, non-baptized infants can find salvation is effectively the second harrowing of hell. So we can give it a date, 2007.